30 Minutes with Ron. Hello, I'm Ron Gagliardi. I am the host of 30 Minutes with Ron, and tonight I have an interesting thing to share with you. I haven't done this before, but I was talking with a person who's a good friend of mine, and we talked about having a possible standard opening to the show and maybe a standard close. So here it is. I have a major philosophy of life. It used to be no negativity in or out, but then I realized that there's two negatives in there, no and negative. You can't have no and negative in a positivity thing, so I changed it to only positivity in and out. It's my major philosophy of life, makes me the happiest person I know, and I even wanted to have a tattoo, O-P-A-O, that's how I say it, O-P-A-O, O-P-I-A-O, but my wife wouldn't let me. And of course, I have to say that I should do what my wife tells me not to do, but I didn't do it. Does that make sense? Anyway, I'm positive that we're going to have an amazing show this evening because the guest that I have has some stories to tell. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to the one, the only, Eric Anderson.
Thank you, Ron. Great to be here.
Well, I hope it will be.
We'll give it our best shot.
Yeah, we'll give it our best shot, and then we'll see the show, and then we'll figure it out.
Okay.
All right, so I want to find out some things about Eric. I know a lot about Eric because I've been a friend of his for quite some time. Matter of fact, I even married him and his wife, Lisa.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it was quite a ceremony, wasn't it?
It was.
Oh,
and
yeah.
he did it sitting down. And so in the family, our children say, when they're very young, man, sit down. Yes, he is the man. He's known as the man sit down to our small children.
Why was I sitting down?
Because we're looking at the wedding pictures. Because we were standing up. So, and it was a small, tight affair there in our living room. So I think you felt more appropriate in that position.
In the sit-down position.
Yeah.
All right, so what do you do?
Well, most of the time I am, what am I doing? I'm working on my old house and collecting old things, but the day job is that I am an administrator for the physics department at Southern Connecticut State University.
A nice place, by the way.
Yes.
I went there, but it was SCSC back in the day, yes.
I recall.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been there 22 years now, so, and
Okay.
longer, because before that I was a student there as well.
A good place to be.
Right.
Yes. They like that. Southern likes to know that there's people talking and saying good things about them.
That's right.
Okay. So now, that's your full-time job. But your part-time job, and I just came up with this just as the show started, he's a browser.
Okay, we'll go with that.
All right. So what does a browser do?
Well, we look for things that are going to waste, particularly very old, vintage, antique things, often with a bent for architecture. And what's that when they, like Indiana Jones? What did he do? He was an archaeologist.
Yes, archaeologist. Right. Okay.
Architectural archaeology.
Arc.
Right.
Okay.
But I won't stop at that. There's
right.
also the whole coin-operated device side of the collection too. But
yes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have to add that I have seen this room that has all these wonderful coin-operated devices, sometimes called pinball machines and video games. It's quite the collection. Do you ever spend time playing these things?
Yes. Thanks to my daughter, my 10-year-old.
Whose name is?
Sagan.
Okay.
Named after the Carl.
Excellent.
For his inspirational role in my life. And the physics thing kind of ties together. Yeah, she's a big fan of the 70s and 80s vintage arcade games, and I like that she likes those kind of games, because unlike the more modern video game that its job is to suck you in and play for countless hours until your mind can do nothing else but think of that video game.
Right.
I don't know how many people know this, but arcade games were designed to keep a player for no more than 3 minutes. In fact, the operators of the games were instructed that if the statistics that you can get from these games because there's a lot going on inside them that the player doesn't know about.
Right.
If the statistics show that people are playing for longer than 3 minutes, there's a way to make them harder to play.
Oh.
And you turn them up because you want the next quarter or 50 cents going into the game as soon as possible.
Yes.
So my daughter can't spend endless days just playing video games. She plays for about 3 minutes.
And that's it.
For a game, and then game over.
That makes perfect sense.
Move on to her schoolwork.
All right. Now, when we were talking just before, when we were doing the sound testing, rather, or I could say town testing. It makes no difference either way. You told me about going on trips with your mother, who it turns out was the first browser in your life.
And I think it may go back generations behind that as well. But I only kind of, those memories only came back to me more recently. It's not like I thought of it at the time and grew, into doing that because she did that, but maybe subconsciously. So yeah, Mom would just spontaneously pull over in front of an abandoned Victorian out in the country and run in. Now she's at this point, maybe in her late 20s or early 30s, and I'd be, I'm 5 years old waiting in the car, and she'd come back with some artifact, and I'm hoping that the place didn't collapse under her weight. So yeah, she was a collector as well, and her father before her, and the people who lived in our home before us. So yeah, our home has the collections of 160 years worth of living, because no one has ever moved out of our house.
Oh.
So from its construction in 1857, and the first family that lived there for several generations, our family's only the second owners, so to speak. No one moved. The last of the Ives family who started there died living there, and the home was sold to my family, still filled with their belongings.
Oh.
So then we added our belongings.
Oh, jeez.
And yeah, it's quite a museum.
Well, yes, you have this garage in the backyard that's really not a garage. It's a place where it's like floor to ceiling of good stuff.
Yeah, there's a couple of those actually. Those barns.
Wow.
But neither of them were a conventional barn. One started out as a conventional animal and carriage barn, but in about 1900, Fred Ives, who he was working for Ball and Socket. He was an executive there. I think he became the president in 1912. But anyway, he had the resources to jump right on automobiles, and the finest automobiles, Pierce Arrows, and not just one of them, a couple of them.
Wow.
So he's driving these exemplary, like Rolls-Royce level cars, and West Main Street out front, or Depot Street at the time, is a dirt road. But he's got a concrete driveway, decorative, and he has taken the animal barn and had it completely renovated into a heated, finished, paneled interior, like stained woodwork garage for his fancy cars, because of course even then he knew they have to be climate controlled to preserve your automobile properly.
Oh, of course.
So, yeah, so it retains a lot of that character with the sliding door, the fancy sliding doors. That was for the cars. And I must have a picture here, or we'll get a picture in.
All right. Well, let's start with the pictures. Now, this is called the Ives Anderson House. Okay.
Yes.
So now we have this book here. Right. Some guy wrote this book, Images of America, Cheshire.
Who could they find to do such a thing?
I don't know. I hope to find out this guy someday. But on page 23 is, and I'm going to hold this up for our camera guy. All right, how we doing? Good? Perfect. All right, so this is the picture in Images of America, Cheshire, of the Ives Anderson house. This is the house that Eric currently lives in and did a lot of work on. As a matter of fact, and I'm going to close the book now and get back on my beautiful face. As a matter of fact, for years, he provided entertainment for the people of Cheshire and other towns too, who were traveling up and down Maple Avenue, not Maple Avenue, West Main Street. Wake up, wake up. West Main Street, and they would watch all the new things that were going on in the house and outside the house, because they couldn't see in the house too well, but they knew things were going on.
Something's happening.
Tell us what happened. You got the house at a certain point. I don't even know if there's a picture of it here in its older days. But.
Well, the getting of the house really just involved my grandparents, passing on to where you go after you're not here anymore.
There, yep.
Because I grew up in the home, and my mom grew up there before me, and my working class, humble means family got the place in 1943. And so unlike the Ives family, who was there before, who had very deep pockets, my family struggled a bit. We made this very large place, about 4,500 square foot, single family house, into apartments, as a lot of people did, with large older buildings. And so between the rental and my grandfather's printing business, they made ends meet, but it's really quite a large place to maintain properly. So yes. By the time I was a kid in the late 60s, early 70s, it had fallen into disrepair. My grandparents were elderly, but I kind of even then would look up at the gables and see some of the ornamentation and think, this place must have been pretty nice a long time ago. Right. And so I dreamed from childhood of bringing it back. It came to me, so to speak, like I came into my own as the owner of the house with it looking basically like this. It had been encased in cement asbestos siding, hiding a lot of the architectural detail and making it look kind of shabby. But the sales pitch in the early 50s, which is very similar to the vinyl sales pitch of today, it was true. It kept the place safe and dry. It didn't look so good, but it worked. And I stripped that down very gradually. So this is what you're talking about, is the spectacle.
Yes.
Is from time to time, me up on a ladder or up on the bucket of a bucket truck apparatus, taking down the siding from one elevation, and then maybe I wait a couple of years and do another.
Yeah, why not?
And so I'm struggling as well with the financing of this. But I'm determined, and time was on my side.
You did a good job. But you showed me a picture of what it was originally.
Okay.
The Italianate thing.
The reason I gave you the picture for the book that I did give to you.
Oh, I was the author? Oh, we found out who the author was.
The cat's out of the bag.
We found out who the author was.
The reason I gave you that particular picture, because the house has been through somewhat of a metamorphosis since its first construction, was the one I liked for where I wanted, that I wanted to emulate as my I'm all done picture, right? To go from the kind of shabby condition in which I inherited the place, so in the 70s and the 80s, with it like this, it would be customary for visitors, especially visitors who were somehow involved in the building trades, to say to me something like, how much land you got here? And I'd say, oh, I don't know, 5 or 6 acres. Oh, you got to tear this place down and build condos. You can make a fortune. So it goes from that extreme to when I finally did get very close to, and this is going to be a terrible picture. I'm going to have to get you a nice digital copy, or better color. When I finally did get to something now that resembles the 1890s picture that's in your book, beauty's only skin deep. It's for real,
right? Because
the same kind of folks who before were encouraging me to tear it down, and it has a little bit to do with cutting down a tree that was hiding it right in front too. Their traffic would stop. People would get out of their car and say, "Oh my God, has this house always been here? It is the most beautiful. This is a landmark. Can I take pictures?" So it's almost like I inspired tourism on West Main Street, and to this day, especially if I'm out in the front yard, people then feel like they can approach the place. And I've had people come in to take pictures so that they could have their architect or their builder build something like it. Wherever they are. They say, nice. "Oh, we would like a barn built just like your barn. Can I take pictures of your barn? Or can we take pictures of your front porch because we want to have something made like that?" So the dramatic, the dichotomy there in my own lifetime of this place is a wreck, tear it down, and this is a beautiful landmark, it warms my heart, of course.
Of course it does. Now we're going to take a slight interim here.
Sure.
Because you mentioned the 5 or 6 acres that you had.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you're very into history.
Yeah.
You were involved with the Cheshire Historical Society.
True.
And
I was on the board there briefly.
Okay, and you founded the Cheshire Historic District Commission?
Yes, I was one of
the founders. Okay.
Yep. First, the Historic District Study Committee.
Okay.
Before that, the Historic Preservation Study Committee. So, yeah, it was a process.
Okay.
It took several years.
And then the last time I was on the property, you gave us a little tour. You said that you did something with donating the acreage in some fashion so that forever it stays as acreage.
Right.
Please explain that, because that was probably a very community-oriented thing you did.
As usual, I'm probably going to give you more than you want.
Oh, well.
So, okay. 1850, Industrial Revolution, 24 guys in Cheshire get together and say, let's pool our money and build a factory. Let's build a brass button factory. And that was Cheshire Manufacturing. In 1901, it became known as Ball and Socket Manufacturing. So there, after the 1850 startup down on Depot Street, close to the depot, the top dogs in the company, the chief executives, they said, let's build our glorious homes right up the hill. So the finest homes in Cheshire were up on West Main Street for the president, the vice president, the treasurer, the superintendent, and others who were running Ball and Socket or Cheshire Manufacturing. Mine was the home of, at the time, the superintendent Titus Ives. Across the street, just up a little ways, there's a building with a long front porch and many columns that was Arid Welton's house. He was the guy who actually owned all this property, like hundreds of acres along Depot Street that was just orchard farmland. So he was the one who then subdivided into these very nearly 6-acre lots for the other executives.
Okay.
So you had a neighborhood built mostly out of 6-acre lots. Over the course of the 20th century, things were subdivided, redeveloped. It was only 2 of the properties that remained in their original about 6-acre form. So ours and the Warren Doolittle house, who I think he might have been the treasurer originally, but he was one of the original investors to open Cheshire Manufacturing 2 doors up. And now I've got my grubby paws on that place too. So I got another one to fix.
Are you playing Monopoly on West Main Street?
I'm doing my best. I don't know if I'm ever going to get Park Place, but so being that this, what was orchard and meadow and farmland at one time, was no longer in use for that purpose. Over the course of my life, it turned into a forest. And except for my immediate yard that I mow, like suburbanites mow.
Right.
But still, there were people coming along saying to me, okay, but you've got that land out back. Why don't you sell off those lots? And I thought, when I'm dead and gone, somebody's going to sell off that land and build some stuff on it. And I like the forest there. And I don't know. I think my daughter may stay in the house, and her children and their children, but they may not. So it turns out that the law allows donation of land to a land trust or other organization that will protect that land in perpetuity. And Cheshire has a fine land trust. And they were the recipients of my donation of the development rights. So I didn't outright donate the land wholly to them. I donated the development rights. So they control what can be done on that land other than my hiking through the woods, or I could use it for agriculture, or I could plant trees, but it can't be built on in perpetuity. So until our entire form of government unravels and we go to that Mad Max world you were talking about, until that happens, the Cheshire Land Trust will keep it from being built there. Okay. So, and it's rare to have a preserve like that in town center. Yeah. So they welcome the donation because they said, we have many acres on the outskirts, but right there in town center, it's very uncommon for anyone to donate land. So there we have it.
Congratulations, you've done good.
Thanks.
Now I should add a couple of things. One thing is that he mentioned Mad Max, which is a movie. And you didn't hear us talk about that because we talked about that before, so we didn't want to confuse anybody.
Right.
That was a movie that I saw at the Cheshire Cinema, or Cheshire Theater, I guess. Did it have both
It was
names?
cinema starting in the mid-'60s, so
okay,
you're
all
good.
right. So I did, okay. And a friend of mine and I saw it, and he got so upset by all the violence, he actually had a stomach reaction to it. And also you mentioned your daughter.
Yeah.
Now, you have more than one child.
That's true.
And that
There's
second child, whose name is?
Alexandria, known as Allie.
Allie, okay, because she might see this in some time when she understands English.
Well, I made a rule for myself. There must be 10 years between children.
Oh.
So I've got the 10-year-old and I've got the 1-year-old, and yeah, she'll probably come along to that at some point.
We wanted to make sure that when she sees this, she doesn't feel upset.
That's all right.
Okay.
Eventually she will.
All right, good. Okay, so now back to the house.
Yeah.
All right. What do you have to show us? I think you had some pictures of Titus.
Yeah, so Titus and Anne, I don't know how well this is going to show up. This is them luxuriating on their front porch at the time. Now, this front porch was removed and replaced in the 1890s. This photo is from maybe the 1870s or so. They were, well, he was 29 years old, and they were newly married when the house was built in 1857, which is 7 years after the founding of the factory.
Right.
So they had 2 children there who they raised in the home. Their son Frederick Ives, he stayed there in the house all of his life. His sister married Cheshire Baldwin and moved to Saranac Lake, New York. And Fred, the son, went on to become the longest term president the factory ever had. From I believe 1912 to his death. He died as president in 1935. And actually, they thought so much of him that about 40 acres on Mountain Road was dedicated as the Fred Ives Memorial Park.
Oh. And
so there was a park on Mountain Road in the 1940s, mainly for ball and socket employees, but also for others. At some point, that fell out of favor, and the land was sold and developed into 1950s ranches and so forth. But so Fred then is here, taken in our home probably about 1910 or so, with his wife, Lily Morse, another Cheshire person. Back in those days, Cheshire folks often married Cheshire folks.
Keep it in the family.
That's right.
Keep it in the town.
That's right. But they both passed away without any children, which is why in 1935, when Fred died and Lily had predeceased him, there was no one to inherit the house other than his sister in New York State, who had been away for decades, you know, and she was older herself, and she wasn't prepared to come back, but she wasn't prepared to sell her family home either. And I did make contact with their descendants, and I actually saw letters that she had written in the 1930s explaining how, you know, she was distraught at the idea of selling her family home, but she can't keep up with it. And so finally she gives up in 1943 and sells to my uncle. But she didn't have the wherewithal to clean out the whole estate, which is why we got it still full of Ives stuff.
The goodies.
Yeah, still full of the goodies. And then my uncle Irving Anderson, he lived there with his wife and their 2 children for about a few years in the mid-40s. I guess from 43 to 49, and then he was a building contractor and developer in town. Actually the first in the 1930s, he started subdividing Cheshire into little homes in the Honey Pot Glen area, because my great-grandfather had a farm in Honey Pot Glen, and actually Irving became a black sheep of the family. There was a huge, terrible rift, and he was out of the will. Not that my great-grandfather had anything left after Irving kind of took everything.
Darn that Irving.
So anyway, the old farmhouse is still there, but it's all filled up over in Honey Pot Glen now with homes. His brother Oland bought the property from his own brother in 1949. They together renovated it into apartments, into 4 units. And then he raised his daughter, Brenda, my mom, from 49. She moved in when she was about 11 years old. And so she grew up there. I was born in 65, living there in the same house. And, well, and now my family goes on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you had some other photos here. We were going to talk about Cheshire Theater.
A little bit about that.
Now, we only have like 3 minutes or so left.
Sure.
So why don't we finish this story?
Sure.
And then we'll probably have you on another time to talk about Cheshire Theater, because that's an amazing story in itself.
Yes.
All right, so pick a picture.
As a collector of old things, you know, things like Cheshire Theater is a thing that I would want to collect.
That's right. The whole theater. Yeah, he has parts of it still in his garage. I've sat in some of the theaters, seats rather, from the theater.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, the video, the salvage in that video will be entertaining, so I hope we get to that.
All right, so pick a picture.
So one of the things in my contact with the Ives family, the Ives descendants, who had not been near or in the house since the 1930s, and now there I am in the mid-1990s contacting them. One woman in particular who fortunately lived in the same location in Maryland. So she was the granddaughter of the woman in Saranac Lake, New York. In the 1950s, she was in Frederick, Maryland, and somehow was still there because I saw her name in an obituary from the mid-1950s. You know, as a surviving.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering, how did she get in the obituary? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So there, the sister of Fred Ives, who grew up in my home, you know, late in the 19th century and early in the 20th century, she passed away in 1955. Her obituary states the name of this woman in no, it was Germantown, Maryland, and there I am in the mid-90s calling information and hoping that this person is still in Germantown, Maryland, all these years later, and she was. And she answers the phone on my first try. She answers the phone. I say to her, "You don't know me. I'm in Cheshire, Connecticut, in the home of one of your ancestors." And she responds, "Oh, the Cheshire House," as though they talk about it all the time, although she hadn't been there since she was about 6 years old, and she's now then in her 70s. She says, "This weekend, I'm driving up north to settle my father's affairs in New Hampshire. I'll be passing through, and I will stop at your house and bring you a plethora of pictures from the 1800s." So it was like beyond my wildest dreams that this person existed, had pictures that survived in her family for what, 60, 70 years beyond their contact with the Cheshire property.
Right.
And so I have this wealth of information. So she, not being from Cheshire herself, was having difficulty identifying a lot of these. So she was counting on me to help her. One I found, and I was convinced that it was 345 West Main Street, the property that I've recently acquired. And I walked up to 345 West Main Street to bestow this upon the owner there, much as a woman bestowed a picture of my house to me from the Ball and Socket Archives in 1980.
I'm going to have to cut you off.
I know.
We only have a minute left.
We didn't plan well.
No, we didn't. Well, we'll have to put this into show number 2. All right, so first of all, I'd like to thank Eric Anderson, I know who you are, for coming on the show today. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. And I'd like to sign off with OPAO, only positivity, in and out.